we're going to talk about the uniqueness of Jesus. Think about all the organizations that are out there right now, religious organizations. Did you notice they all like Jesus, right? They'll all try to put him into their organization. Jehovah's Witnesses, Jesus is a big deal. In the Mormons, he's a big deal. For the Muslims, he's a big deal. But do you notice what happens to Jesus in every case? He gets demoted, doesn't he? What do the Jehovah's Witnesses say? Do you know what their position is about Jesus?
Junior God.
Yeah, he's a lesser God. He is a created being. Same with the Mormons. In fact, Jesus and Lucifer both said they would come to earth to say things, and they chose Jesus, and that ticked off Lucifer. And I mean, it's just all kind of weird stuff. But Jesus keeps getting dropped down. For the Muslims, he's a prophet, but he's not the Son of God. He didn't die for people's sins. In fact, somehow there was an old switcheroo. He wasn't on the cross. And somebody else got to be on the cross. And so, over and over again, Jesus and how we see Jesus, he's being demoted in every other religion. And so I thought maybe tonight it'd be good to step back and think about, in the big picture, what makes Jesus unique? What makes him not just another one of dozens of these people who have started a religion? I think today, for some reason, people have this relativistic idea that one's about as good as another. Pick a little bit here and a little bit there, kind of a menu sort of thing. Okay, I'll take Jesus and Buddha for $500. So you get this kind of mixture that goes on that really isn't fair. There's Jesus and then there's all the others. So we're going to look at 9 different ways on your outline there. I think we brought some spare outlines if you'd like them. They're in the back. Sure, move around, by the way. Feel free to, you guys are always so nice. Feel free to stretch or get food or, whatever you feel like back there. So we're going to take a look at 9 different ways that Jesus is unique. And a lot of it you're going to say, oh yeah, I knew that. Okay, but at least one night we'll put it all together, right? So again, we'll have good talking points when we're dealing with other people. So the first thing I did was I just found some quotes on Jesus, just typed Jesus and looked at the different kinds of people that had something to say about him. Did you notice, I tried to pick people that weren't necessarily even Christian, and people from different walks of life, famous sometimes, not so famous maybe in other times, but I gave you several quotations. Let me just talk about one here. Here's Napoleon. Think he knew human nature? He was in a position of authority to watch what happens when people are in groups, and he knew what worked and what didn't work, and for a long time he pulled off some amazing things in France. I know men, I tell you that Jesus Christ is no mere man. Between him and every other person in the world, there's no possible term of comparison. At this hour, millions of men would die for him. I bet in a way there's a kind of a twinge there. Millions of people wouldn't die for Napoleon. He probably would have liked that, but he says Jesus is it. He's number one. Here's a guy I like a lot because I like science fiction. Does the name H.G. Wells ring a bell? Ding, ding, ding. What book do you associate him with?
War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds. They've done that one, 2 or 3 times as a movie? Tom Cruise was the last main character, but they did one in the 50s as well. How about The Time Machine? You ever heard of that one?
Time Machine.
Yeah. So H.G. Wells, but he's more than a science fiction writer. He was a great historian. But he's not a believer. The guy has no Christian roots at all. And he says as much. I'm not a believer. But I must confess as a historian, right? He wrote this whole history of the world, really ambitious thing. As a historian, this penniless preacher from Nazareth. I mean, think about the background. No money. He's from the podunk area of the world, and then he's in a podunk area of the podunk area of the world, right? He's from Nazareth. Remember in the New Testament, they tell Nathaniel, hey, we know Jesus. We think he's the Messiah. And Nathaniel says he's from Nazareth. He says, can any good thing come from Nazareth? So he says this penniless preacher from Nazareth is irrevocably the very center of history. Jesus Christ is easily the most dominant figure in all history. Now, that doesn't make him the Son of God. But I mean, do you see how everybody says, this is a unique person? I don't hear him talking about Muhammad this way. I don't hear him talking about L. Ron Hubbard with Scientology this way. It's Jesus, and it's person after person, historian. I had some Jewish people down here that you may recognize. Do you see Einstein? No myth is filled with such life. Isn't that an interesting comment? In other words, you can't make this up. It comes across real as you read about him. So maybe that's as far as Einstein was willing to go, but hey, I'm happy with that. He said, this is not myth. This is a real person. So I'm going to move on if that's okay, or did anybody have any questions or comments about some of those statements? Yes?
I have a question.
Sure.
Have you ever put any of these on Facebook just to see what your friends, what kind of reaction you would get?
No. I'm kind of Facebook averse. I don't know. I should get more involved with it. I know I should, because now I'm trying to get an apologetics ministry going, and I come reluctantly to Facebook.
Well, apologetics for life is like this.
Yeah, it is, but I don't spend a whole lot of time like I should. That's a good idea. I know a lot of people have ministries. That's their ministry, right? They're throwing something out there, and people react, and they get this whole conversation going. Yeah, maybe someday.
There's better websites to that, I think.
Yeah.
I think there's better websites.
Okay, let's talk about the ways that Jesus is unique then. How about number one? And we talked a little bit about this last week, didn't we? We talked about the sources that we have for Jesus are unique when you compare it to the sources that we have for anybody else who started a religion. So, for example, there are creeds. Did we talk about this last week? There are little creeds that are buried in the Gospels and in Paul's letters. And by creed, I mean a statement, a short statement that people could memorize that would encapsulate everything that you wanted to say. In other words, who's Jesus? Well, Paul says, I received this, right? I was given this when I sat down with the early disciples when I first got saved. I received this, and I'm passing this on to you for the people in Corinth, right? So this is his message to the people of Corinth. So here's what I heard. That's what he's saying there. That Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day. There's more to it than that, but that's a creed. And they know it for a lot of reasons, linguistically, the way the words are put together. It's a creed. Paul didn't invent this. He took it from people that were saying this, maybe as they got together to worship, maybe they all chanted this or sang it or something. And he said, I got it from them, and now I'm going to give it to you people of Corinth. What makes this really interesting, this creed, these words that we just read here, go back to maybe the time of Jesus' death, the same year. So there's no time for mythology. There's no time for legend. Already they were saying Jesus lived, Jesus died for us, and Jesus rose again. That's the best message possible, and is there from the very beginning of Christianity. Okay, so you don't have creeds like this with Buddhism and some of these other ancient groups that got started, religions. Here's one more just so you can see what I mean by creed. He's the image of the invisible God. This is from Colossians, by the way. He's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation, for by him all things were created. Now, do you see how short that is? But it's a summary, isn't it, of who Jesus is. He's the image of God. You want to see God? Take a look. He walked, right? That was him right there. The firstborn. By the way, Jehovah's Witnesses have a field day with that word firstborn. It just means preeminent. It doesn't mean he was born, that he came into existence. So if you ever sit down with a Jehovah's Witness, they may want to take you to Colossians here. Firstborn just means preeminent. Okay, you can do a Greek search on that sometime. For by him all things were created. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses are going to have a problem with that as well, aren't they? Because they will say, well, wait a minute, Jesus was created and then he created everything else. Is that what this says? Does it say, for by him everything else was created? This says everything. It was all. Everything was created by Jesus. Right? So do you see what it's saying? That he's not a created being. He is a forever being, and he brought everything into existence. So these things are creeds. You don't see those in other kinds of religions. So we have creeds that are early, way back to the time of Jesus, and the things you just talked about. We have a lot of them, right? We have all these manuscripts. We don't have that kind of richness anyplace else. And then I mentioned eyewitnesses and the authenticity of what's in there. We talked about that, I think, last week. Right? That they got the archaeology right, and they got their history right, and they got the locations of things right. Luke talked about the way ships sailed. He talked about the kinds of political structures that you would encounter as you went into these various cities. So you don't see things that crisp, that clear, when you're looking at other founders of some of these ancient religions. So is he different? Yeah, the sources about Jesus are way different. Let's move on to something else in prophecies. Have you gone through this at all, especially during Christmas time? Have you ever kind of done a Advent reading that looks at some of the prophecies of Jesus? Isn't it amazing how many prophecies are in there? 2 or 3 stand out, and I want to look at a couple of them here, but there are so many, and we won't take the time, but what tribe would he come from? It's in the Bible, predicted way back in Genesis. We're going to talk about when he was born in just a minute. The city that he was born in. The kind of birth that he had, the unusual birth, his childhood, the purpose of his death, betrayal, death, resurrection. It's all there. So let's think about that for just a second before we look at a couple of specific things. If you come on the scene and you decide you're going to pretend to be the Messiah, and you've got a few disciples that are going to try to pull the wool over people's eyes, but all of these checklists are in the Hebrew Bible, you come on the scene, what do you think people are going to do? They're going to match you up, right? They're going to say, what tribe are you from? Well, you better be from the right tribe. Do you think they could find out if you're trying to snow them? Oh yeah, that was a big thing, wasn't it, in Israel? Who's your father? Who's your mother? Where's your ancestry? Where'd you come from? And they all knew each other's. Right? So they knew who was in what tribal line. Do you think they could find out where you were born? No, that's pretty easy. They could find out all these things. So if you're coming on and you're a fake, I don't see how you gain any traction. Because after all, Jesus started this, and the disciples started this where? Jerusalem. Israel Central, right? They didn't go off to Persia and start the belief and say, see, he matched up to all these things in Israel. No, he was in Israel. And all the disciples were there, right? They were in that land. So if you're going to fake it, wouldn't you go off someplace else? And if he doesn't match up to all these things, people there are going to know it. What a gutsy thing to do, to start your religion right there where people could check on all of these things. So because of time, if that's all right, I just want to take maybe 3 of the things that are there. Here's one. I usually, this is the first time I've done the PowerPoint like this, I used to have somebody bring out a calculator and just kind of run through it, but nobody else could get what I was talking about and everybody's eyes would glaze over. So here it is up on a screen. We won't take the time, but if you look in Daniel 9, it's a very interesting prophetic section there. Daniel says, there's a clock running as far as when the Messiah comes. He says, from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one. Who do you think the anointed one is? Messiah, right? So Messiah is just another term for anointed one, right? Because he used to actually pour oil over the chosen king, you know. So until the anointed one comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. Just about everybody in the world agrees that Daniel's talking about sevens of years. Okay, so that's the assumption, that's the starting point, but it's not a weird assumption. You know, most people will give you that. So watch what happens when you run the numbers up here. 62 sevens and 7 sevens gets you 69 sevens, right? That's not tricky math. So that's what the 69 is on the bottom there. So 69 sevens. So how many years do you get? 69 times 7, you get 483. You see that? Now here's where it gets a little crazy, so hang on. When they used years back then, they were doing 360-day years.
Right.
Okay, so the ancients were doing 360-day years. So let's first convert it to what Daniel was talking about. So that's where we're multiplying 360, right? So how many years, how many days in each year? What's our grand number? Huge, right? 173,880 days until the Messiah comes. So the slash mark means let's reconvert it to our time, right? So we see it as a 365-day a year calendar, right? Makes sense? So we're going to divide those days into that monster number to get the total years that we would understand. It comes out to 476. Okay, now of course the question is, what decree is he talking about? Remember, Daniel is in the Babylonian time period, right? He's been hauled off by the Babylonians. Babylonians come down, they get crushed by the Persians. So along comes a ruler named Artaxerxes, and now they hear these Jewish people, they're in captivity, and Nehemiah goes to the king and petitions, can we go back to our own land? And the Persians were actually much more enlightened as far as rulers go. I mean, they were all pretty tough people, but they didn't think it was good to keep people against their will. So they said, okay, you want to go back? Well, not all of them went back, but you know the story of Nehemiah. They go back to try to fix the walls up. The Jerusalem is a mess. And it's a real sorrowful thing when they left Jerusalem, how beautiful it was, and now it's just, weeds and it's a mess. So, but they go back, right? So people say, well, that decree, we know when that decree happened because they've got all the records from Persia. And that was in 445 BC. All right, now we can actually get somewhere, right? You take the 445, you run off the 445, but remember it was 476 according to Daniel. That takes you up to about 31 AD. Let's see, do you know of anybody running around in Palestine right around 31 AD? And if you think this is just kind of crazy math that people are doing today to try to fit Jesus in there, there are all sorts of comments by rabbis after Jesus who said, don't let your people read Daniel. Don't read Daniel during your services because they'll sit down and they'll do the same kind of math and they will say, we missed him. So let's say you're sitting in a synagogue, 200 AD, and you crunch these numbers and you come up with 30 AD and you're going, we must have missed him. Where were you? What happened? So some of the rabbis said, don't bring this up. Right? Let's just keep moving. Let's talk about something else. So I think that's a fascinating part of this prophecy. What other religious leader has these kinds of prophecies about this many, right? Let's just do maybe one or two more. The type of birth. Well, this famous verse out of Isaiah 7, usually somebody reads it during Christmas time. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel. Well, a lot of people get kind of hung up on this. They don't like that word virgin. They say, yeah, but they also had a word that they could have used which meant just a young woman. Okay, except 250 years before Jesus, this is important, 250 years before Jesus, the Jews thought it was really important to get their Bible out of Hebrew into Greek, because that was the going language at the time, right? If you wanted to be anything in society, you better learn some Greek. And so their kids are learning Greek, and they're going, man, we got to translate our Bible so people know what we're talking about. So they translated from the Hebrew to the Greek. That was called the Septuagint. That name ring a bell? Have you heard anybody talk about that before? Yeah, so it's called the Septuagint. Here's what I think is fascinating. Jews, 250 years before Jesus, had a choice. They could have taken that verse and said the young woman, or they could have chosen virgin, meaning a woman who's never known a man. Guess what they chose? The Septuagint used virgin. So it strikes me that Jesus is fulfilling something unique rather than just a young woman's going to have a kid. What's unique about that? Right? I mean, a lot of younger gals in those days especially were married and having kids. So I just think that's interesting that it's a real specific comment about an unusual, unique situation as far as the birth. Yeah.
All the rest are just regular occurrences.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. If you have a chance, again, I think just because of time I'll move on, but have you read Isaiah 53? What do you notice in there, or what strikes you about Isaiah 53? What kinds of things does it say about Jesus?
Wasn't liked.
Yeah, he was not liked. He was persecuted. We get healed by the torture and the ghastly things that are done to this individual. Now, it doesn't name him as Jesus, obviously, but it's called the suffering servant, right? That somehow all of humanity is benefited by this person going through this terrible ordeal. And again, Jewish rabbis have had a hard time twisting this thing around. Isaiah 53 has been so powerful that some Jewish Bibles take it out. They just go Isaiah 52, 54, 55. Well, I guess that gets rid of a problem.
Was that the one that the chosen Jews wrote a book and preach on that?
Oh, the ones who are Christian now? The Messianic Jews?
Messianic Jews.
Yeah.
I think you'll hear and gave us out some of those books.
Oh, okay, that's good.
On Isaiah 53.
I saw a really interesting person on the street kind of deal in Israel, and a Christian who was a Jewish Christian went around and he read Isaiah 53, and he said, who does this appear to be? And they're going, Jesus. And he said, do you know where this comes from? No, it must be in the New Testament. So they're not even reading their own Old Testament. It's kind of sad. And he told them, it's Isaiah, it's one of your prophets. And they're going, oh. And the eyes kind of went, Rick?
non-Messianic Jews interpret Isaiah 53 as being the nation Israel, Jesus Christ.
But you know, that doesn't work very well. How is it now? It's true, Israel has suffered, hasn't it? It has definitely been persecuted and all these horrendous things. But how in the wide world of sports has that helped anybody else, right? I mean, it's hurt the Jews. How does that bring you a blessing? How does that bring you a settlement with God? Because Israel had the Holocaust. I mean, I don't get it. So I don't think it works very well. But yeah, I've heard that Israel is the suffering servant there. Well, anyway. How about Psalm 22? Can we take a second and look at that? When Jesus was on the cross, he's quoting Psalm 22. Now I'm going a little further into Psalm 22, so I'm not giving those first few verses. All who see me mock me. All my bones are out of joint. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. A band of evil men has encircled me. They have pierced my hands and my feet. So what I wanted to do, I tried to find a picture of Jesus on the cross. Not just Jesus on the cross, but the people around him. Because I think it works really well with what he's quoting there. What do you see as far as crucifixion itself, in particular, that would apply to Jesus as you look at those words?
The mocking,
Yeah, the mockery.
piercing.
The piercing is powerful, isn't it? They have pierced my hands and my feet. When David wrote this, there was no crucifixion. Right? That was a Roman deal. Romans knew how to put you to death. Boy, were they efficient people. Let's see, how can we inflict the most pain, the most excruciating pain, the most embarrassment, and stretch it out maybe over a few days if you wanted to. You just hammer them up there and leave them for days until the exhaustion took over.
What verse does that start with?
I don't know. I can look it up, but you do that because, okay. Yeah, it's kind of in the middle of Psalm 22. How about all my bones are out of joint? You ever had anybody tell you what happens to somebody who's on the cross when that weight is there? It twists the shoulders right out of joint, and so you got to push up on your feet to keep that pain down, and that's how you breathe, because once you're like this, your diaphragm doesn't work. So you got to pull up on that. Oh man, I mean, it's just awful to think about. But there you go. All my bones are out of joint. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. These people are losing moisture as they're up there. They've got the shock, they've got the blood loss, and they're definitely saying, I thirst, as Jesus said. A band of evil men has encircled. I mean, everything on there is exactly what Jesus went through. And again, people might say, well, somebody just wrote it up later to make it look like this. No, I mean, it started in Jerusalem, and they went around and they said, you crucified the Messiah. That's what Peter's first sermon was in Acts, right? He said, you took this good man, this man from God, and you crucified him. He was the Messiah. And they said, oh, we were stricken to the heart. What do we do? Well, you couldn't say that unless these things matched up, right? Why were so many people coming to Jesus? Because they knew Psalm, and they went, oh my goodness, this is the proof of it, because they knew it. It was in Jerusalem. It was a big event. I'm sure a lot of people stood around and saw that take place. Well, again, because of time, I'll keep moving, but if you have a chance, just look through some of those verses sometime. Just no other religious leader has this kind of powerful testimony in another book before he came on the scene. Right? This is just amazing stuff. It knocks me out. How about number 3? Events during his life were unique. We've already covered the birth, right? So could we move on past that? Healings. Muhammad said he didn't heal anybody. He never claimed any healing power. Even critics of the New Testament who are not Christians grant that Jesus performed something that was pretty extraordinary. Right, so we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. How about acceptance of worship? Let's put ourselves for just a minute back in Jewish days, back in the first century. If you worshipped somebody, was that acceptable? I mean, could you walk down the street and perform acts of worship in front of people? No. What have they grown up on? You worship God. And there's one God. Don't go off with these other gods. Right? People used to get put to death for doing things like that. Right? This is monotheism. Right? You only worship the one God. So all of a sudden, they're bowing down in front of Jesus. You ever read other places in the Bible where an angel comes and people start to bow down? The angel says what?
Don't do that.
Get up. Right? No, you don't do that for me. But Jesus doesn't say, oh, come on, you guys are being too nice. He accepts it, right? He walks on water, gets back in the boat, and they just fall down and worship him. That's the one in Matthew. He's it. They worship. They don't say, hey, that was interesting. They worshiped him. Okay, so that strikes me as something you don't notice other places with other founders of religions. How about this part about what he said was unique? Honest to goodness, can you imagine? Oh, I'm going to skip over this. No, actually, I'll do this first. Jesus called himself something over and over again. His most common phrase about himself was Son of Man. And people said, oh, how nice. He's just saying he's part of the earth, right? He's one of us. No. If you go back to, one more time, Daniel's a big thing, isn't it? So if you go back to Daniel 7, this is what Daniel is saying. This is not Jesus, this is Daniel talking. So Daniel's got all these visions going on. He says, in my vision, there before me was one like a son of man, there it is, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days. Who do you think that is? That's God, right? In other words, the God of eternity. He's Ancient of Days. So he approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men worshipped him. So this is not Jesus being humble. Oh, shucks, I'm just one of you. I'm a son of another man. He's claiming this authority. When he is in front of the priests as they're ready to pass judgment on him at the end of his life, they tell him, they ask him, are you really the Messiah? And he says, yes, and you will see me coming with the clouds of heaven. Right? So he's quoting Daniel at that point. And they said, that's it. And they tear their robes and they're upset and they say, off, you're done. So there's Jesus making some amazing claims about himself. Well, what other kinds of claims? Well, can you imagine, let's say we're a Sunday morning, right? And we're all downstairs, we're listening to Dennis, and Dennis steps in front of the mic, from behind the pulpit there with his mic, and he says some of these things. Those are pretty outrageous statements for a person to make, aren't they? Isn't that amazing? Which one strikes you as maybe the most eye-popping out of all of these?
For Abraham was born, I am.
Yeah, before Abraham was born, I am. Why is he saying I am? The grammar doesn't seem right there. That's God's name. And you know the Jewish reaction was what? Where's the nearest stone? Right? This guy is claiming more than just he's special. He's claiming godhood at that point. I and the Father are one. Not the Father likes me, I'm trying to do what the Father wants. I and the Father are one. Whoever lives and believes in me will never die. So it's not I'm special. You hang on to me, and I'm guaranteeing an eternity for you. This, I don't know, putting all these comments together really struck me. It just somehow had some more impact than just reading them kind of in context. Just these are amazing statements. There are no other religious leaders that say stuff like this. They may say things like, if you just follow my ideas, life will be better for you, or you'll gain godhood or something, but they're not going to make these kinds of claims about themselves. Isn't that wild? He says he will live forever. No one comes to the Father except by me. Wait a minute, I thought all roads led to God. Apparently not. Yeah.
He also told people their sins were forgiven, and nobody was supposed to be able to do that but God.
Oh, yeah. There's that paraplegic or quadriplegic brought into him, and he says your sins are forgiven, and people go, well, anybody can say that. I can say that to Tim. Your sins are forgiven, Tim. But he says, okay, so you want proof? And he has the guy get up and walk. But you're right. He would say things like, your sins are forgiven. Amazing.
That had to blow their mind.
What's that?
That had to blow their mind.
Oh, yeah. Amazing, huh? Okay, so I included more claims about himself. You can read those sometime. There's the forgive sins comment under 4C. The promises that he gave out. I mean, just amazing things. But again, if that's all right, I'm going to keep moving. Anybody have a question on this? Or I always forget to ask you at a certain point, how you doing? There's a lot to cover, but we're all right. How about number 5? What his friends said. Now, I'm going to get to the enemies in just a minute. I'm going to be fair. But the friends made some interesting comments about him. What did Thomas say? My Lord and my God. Jehovah's Witnesses, I don't want to pick on them tonight, but I'm just saying, since they have a different view of Jesus, they've got to play with this verse, don't they? Doesn't this sound pretty powerful? My Lord and my God? Thomas is saying, you are God. Well, this is what I've heard. I've never talked to a JW that's actually come up with this, but if you take him to this verse, someone will say, Jesus is the Lord that Thomas is referring to. So he's saying, my Lord. And then he's pointing and saying, my God.
They have some
It doesn't say anything that Thomas is talking to two people. There's a quotation mark. It's directed toward Jesus. I think that's really torturing the verse there. But how about John 1? You can again go to the Jehovah's Witnesses with this, and I think they got the John 1 covered. I'll talk about that in a second, but I think you can expose a bigger problem that they have. Here's the beginning of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was God in the beginning. Through Him all things were made. Jehovah's Witnesses are okay with that first verse because they've played a little game with their Bible. Anybody know what they've done? They create the little letter A and they'll put it in front of, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. In other words, Jesus is God, but He's not the God. He is the created being. We'll worship Him, but He's a God. It's not in the Greek, by the way, so they're already playing with the Greek translation there. By the way, they never have released, as far as I know, they've never released the list of the translators. They call it the New World Translation. But they never tell you exactly who translated it. They say, oh, they want to be humble people.
Yeah.
Okay. Just saying, that seems odd to me. So you'll have a hard time. If you go to John 1:1 and say, see, Jesus is God, they'll say, yeah, a God, right? So now you're in a clash because they got their translation, you got yours. Now you got a tug of war. Okay, that doesn't get you anywhere. But they will agree, the next verse, the last line there, through Him all things were made. Aren't we back to that Colossians verse again? What does it say here? You've got some things that are not made, and you got some things that are made. What would you put in the category of things that were never made?
God.
One thing, God. Everything else is over here, right? It's either God or it's made. And this says, through Jesus, all things in that second circle, right? All those made things, that's what He made. But that puts Him in the other circle, right? That makes Him God. So you could sit down if you want. If they think they start nodding their head when you say, let me show you John 1, they're going to go, yeah, I'll kick this out of the ballpark, right? And you take them to the last part there, and then it's like, oh, I'm not sure they have a real good answer for that. So did the friends say some things about him strongly? Yeah. Powerful. These are his friends. These are the people that hung out with him. These are the people that knew him. These are the eyewitnesses. John says that more than once. I touched him. We ate with him. This is what really happened. We're not making this up. Peter says this is not made up. He knew the difference between myth and history. Well, what about number 6? Maybe we're being unfair just picking on the friends of Jesus. But honest to goodness, His enemies. We read Tacitus last week, didn't we? Okay, so I'll skip over Tacitus. But I wanted to show you something. The Jews themselves have something called a Talmud, which is like a rabbi's interpretation of passages in the Bible and their commentary on what it means to follow the laws and all this kind of stuff. So they accumulated all of these. And somewhere between 200 and 500, I don't know why it's so fuzzy, maybe it finally got all put together in book form by the year 500, but somewhere between 200 and 500 they were collecting these Jewish statements. And so now that's not a picture of actually the Babylonian Talmud, it's a more updated one, but it's a picture, it's something to look at. So this is their quote. When they talked about Jesus, on the eve of the Passover they hanged Yeshu, that was their word for Jesus. They hanged him because he practiced sorcery and enticed and led Israel astray. So here is the hostile view of Jesus. Is there anything that you find interesting about that comment? What are they admitting in there? Obviously they don't like him, right? So these are the guys that were hostile to him.
He did miracles.
And he did miracles, right? But they're calling it black arts, right? But they don't say Jesus was this guy and he had this big blown up idea of who he was, but he was a nothing. They don't say that. They say he was doing all sorts of wild stuff, but it was the power of Satan, it was satanic, which Jesus dealt with in the New Testament, right? Some of people following him around that were hostile were saying, you're just doing it through the power of the devil. Well, that's what they were saying after Jesus too. But at least they're admitting that he was up to something, far greater than what a normal person could accomplish. So there we go. There are some of the enemies and what they had to say. How about number 7? What's his impact on the world? Compare this to other founders of religions. Can any other founder even, tick off one of those boxes down there, one of those things? Women. It's Christianity that raised the role of women compared to other religions and other places in the world. Hospitals were started because of Jesus. Universities. See, somehow we got this odd feeling that science and Christianity are at war. They're not. It was science that got started because of Christianity. So universities, capitalism, free enterprise, our civil liberties we have today. I mentioned modern science, elevation of the common individual, high regard for life. All of these are thanks to Christianity. It's unique. And the founder, of course, makes it even more unique. But I'll take Christianity over any other worldview, over any other religious system, as far as the positive things that it's done. Has it done some negative things? Sure. I mean, we can think of crusades and stuff like that. I mean, it's obviously a few renegades that will run around and ruin things, but look at these positive
How many
things.
years had they been persecuted before they struck back with the Crusades?
Well, yeah, I do a talk on that. So, yeah, it was a defensive war anyway, but yeah, that's...
Somebody used that one on me one time. And said Christianity is the most murderous religion in the world.
Oh, wow.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's sad.
And they pointed out and used the Crusades for that. I said, I'll get back to you on that. And I talked to somebody because I knew what had happened, but
Yeah.
I wasn't sure how to really respond to it. And they reminded me that they had gone many years in persecution before they finally fought back.
There's a really good book if you care about that topic. It's pretty thin, easy to get through. It's called God's Battalions. And it's a historian that tells you the real history behind the Crusades. Wow, is that an eye-opener? Because we've got these myths that are out there about bad things that Christianity has done.
What was the name of the book again?
God's Battalions, Battalions, God's Battalions. A guy named Stark, Stark. Yeah.
Could you expound for just a second on the capitalism free enterprise part?
Yeah, it was the reformers, right? The reformers after the Reformation. Up until then, work was considered kind of a bad thing. And Calvin and Luther and these people came along and said, no, you're honoring God by work. This sounds familiar. Did we already talk about this last week? Or was it another class out there? So it got the start of, it's okay to work. Working is fine. And from there, that was called the Protestant work ethic. Have you heard about that? Yeah. And then part of capitalism means you get private property, yes? Right? I mean, if you hold things in what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, if you have a communist kind of thing, everybody owns everything, everybody's equally miserable, right?
Yeah.
The fact they did that, do you know the story of when they came over on the Mayflower? And Bradford was the first governor, and he was trying to be kind of first century New Testament kind of stuff or something, I don't know, but he made communal land there, and people thought, let somebody else work it. And nothing was growing, right? They were just about ready to die, and he then allocated it differently. He said, that's yours. Whatever you get, good luck, you can sell it. People went like gangbusters because it was theirs, right? Because it appeals to human nature. We want for us, right? So capitalism and free enterprise got started that way. One thing I forgot to put on the list just while I'm thinking about it, aren't we big today on diversity?
Yeah.
Do you hear that yakking all the time about, we want to be diverse? Okay, I got time for a real quick story here. Palomar, I teach out at Palomar. On their homepage, it was always trumpeting diversity. And every kind of cultural group that was putting something on the college, they always had pictures of them all over the front page. Well, Palomar had bought some property up by 76 and the 15. You know where that is, near Palamesa? So if you look over on the east side of the road, it's kind of empty, but they're starting to grade it. Okay, that's going to be Palomar's North Campus. Well, when they were doing that, the Indians got upset because they said it was a graveyard or they were uncovering artifacts, and Palomar just kept bulldozing. So apparently, when it came down to it, if it's their money on the line, the bulldozers will go. I just thought that was kind of funny, considering they talk so much about diversity. But Christianity is the most diverse organization on earth. You ever think about that? If you want to trumpet diversity, say, why don't you become a Christian? We're the most diverse people on earth. Where isn't there Christianity? It's booming in South America. It's going to be the largest Christian, China will be the largest Christian nation in about another 20 years. There are hundreds of millions of Christians there. South Korea, booming. Africa, booming. Christianity, you can't think of another place that Christianity hasn't touched and been part of that culture. It's worldwide. North, south, doesn't matter. Cold, dry, hot. It's all over the world. That's a pretty cool thing. Okay, so anyway, that's the impact on the world. Let's go to number 8. His relationship to his religion. Well, let's think about this for just a minute. L. Ron Hubbard is long gone, right? He died off. Can you take him out of Scientology? Can you still be a Scientologist without L. Ron Hubbard?
Yes.
Yeah. You just have to hook yourself up to those little meters, and they read your meters, and they get rid of those bad engrams, and life is good.
Bad what?
You're not even aware of engrams? You must be full of engrams. Okay, we gotta make her a clear, right? You gotta get to be a clear.
Well, I'm with her. Well, they are.
Oh, come on, I'm gonna bring my meter next time. You guys, everybody needs clearing here.
She does Facebook though. So.
Okay.
And it's spelled I-N-G-R-A-M?
E-N-G-R-A-M, engram. Oh, don't look that up. Come on, you guys. Life is short. Don't spend your life on Scientology at all. I mean, except that L. Ron Hubbard got himself in a lot of legal issues and all. The guy was a blowhard, but he's a science fiction author. What does that tell you about science fiction? Supposedly, he said one time, you can make a lot of money off of religion. So he did. How about Joseph Smith? Can you take him out of Mormonism? Right? They don't pray to Joseph Smith. They don't care about Joseph Smith now. That's all those rules, right? You got to follow all these rules. Can you take Buddha out of Buddhism? Yeah, you just do the Eightfold Path, right? Think good thoughts and do this and do that. You don't need Buddha. He got it started, but he's out of there. Muhammad, you just got to do those 5 acts of worship, right? You'll be a good Muslim. Charles T. Russell, Jehovah's Witness, long gone. Nobody cares anymore. Is there something a little different about Jesus and his religion? I am the vine, you're the branches. What? If you cut yourself off from me, say all these other people have cut themselves off. If you cut yourself off from me, you wither. Right? You're nothing without me. You're not a Christian. And if you don't have Jesus, if he's not part of your life. That's a very different thing. You know how people say Christianity is not a religion, it's a relationship. You ever heard that? There's a lot to that, isn't it? We're not talking about a dead guy that we think, boy, he had some great ideas. I'm glad we're following him. That's what you get with this, right? Gee, nice. Dead people, and we like their ideas. But that's not the message of Jesus. Relationship is so different. And now, the best for last. Number 9. The resurrection of Jesus. Does that set him apart from everybody else? Yeah. Quite a bit, huh? I thought what we'd do, if that's okay, because that's a tough one to cover in just a few minutes, but I'm going to give you something that people have called the minimal facts approach. In other words, you could just argue till you're blue in the face about the resurrection. Did it happen? Did it not happen? But there's a man named Gary Habermas, and if you have a chance, look up some stuff on Habermas. Habermas. Gary Habermas. I've got his name down there at the bottom under historical Jesus. Habermas. He is the leading... What? Oh. Did I do something?
Yeah, you went forward 3 slides. Can you go backwards?
Okay, can you punch F5? That should make it happy on the computer. That's what I get for playing with this thing. Okay, now if I go backward. Okay, doesn't want to go backward. Okay. All right. Give me a second. This is review. We're just reviewing. Okay. Let me leave that alone and not touch it. So Gary Habermas says he thinks this is a real effective way to argue for the resurrection. He said, let's take what the vast majority of scholars agree on, whether they're atheists or indifferent or Christians. What do most scholars that investigate this stuff, what are they willing to grant you? These are the things they're willing to grant you. Number one, Jesus died by crucifixion. There doesn't seem to be much doubt. Everybody says, yep. Number two, the tomb was empty. Now, they're not saying he rose from the dead, they're just saying there was an empty tomb. Number three, the disciples believed that he rose and appeared to them. Notice they're not saying he really did it. They're saying this is what we all believe happened. They had some kind of resurrection appearances for them. Paul and James were converted. James, the brother of Jesus, Paul, the great persecutor. Christianity started in Jerusalem. Nobody's going to argue with that. The early Christian church dropped the Jewish way of doing things and immediately went over to new forms of worship involving baptism and communion, the big two. So now, here comes the question. Habermas makes this list, and he says, if you don't want to buy into the real resurrection of Jesus, how do you explain this kind of stuff? I think that's a really good argument. So let's take the first one. This destroys a couple of theories. You ever heard of the swoon theory?
Yeah.
What is it? Do you remember, Tim?
Yeah, he was like, he faked like he was out of it,
Yep. And then they put him in the tomb, and it was cool and comfortable in there, and he kind of came to and came out. They're never real clear how he got out. But anyway, he got out, showed up to the disciples, and they said, he's back! And they were so excited, and they ran out and told everybody and spent the rest of their lives being persecuted because they were worshiping this guy back from the dead. Anybody see a problem with that? I mean, besides number one up here, apparently the Romans didn't really let you off the hook. If they're going to put you to death, you got put to death.
Why did no one else ever see him?
Why did nobody else what?
Well, if he was still alive, then other people would have spotted him and there would have been more sightings.
Well, but Paul says 500 people saw him, right? So,
Why would they
But after-
die?
after
Why would
a point,
they
he
die for a
disappeared.
lie?
but it's not a lie. He shows up and he fakes it. He says, "I'm back. I've conquered death."
But then he disappeared.
Well, that's true. He just
Disappeared.
well, so this guy shows up in front of your door. He's got wounds all over the place. He can hardly stand.
Yeah.
And he says, "I'm back from the dead." You'd say, "No, you're just really, really lucky." Wouldn't you? Would you worship somebody and change your religion because a guy dodged a bullet? Right? He wouldn't have looked so good if there was a swoon theory going on. Forget the fact that he's wrapped up in all of the wrappings and the perfumes and all that kind of stuff, and he gets the stone out of the way and staggers past soldiers and walks halfway through Jerusalem. It's like, I don't think so. So that's a tough one, right? So Jesus died by crucifixion. What about the second issue that most historians will agree on? The tomb was empty. How does that help the case for Christianity? If Jesus is really still there, and they pronounce him as the Son of God, and he's come back from the dead, all the enemies have to do is what?
Produce the body.
Produce the body. Nobody could produce the body. So you say, well, maybe the disciples came in the middle of the night and took it away. That's a theory. Right? Disciples stole the body. That was the one that the Jews...
Yeah, but then you had to get past the guards.
Yeah, Roman guards.
No way, Jose.
Not to mention the big stone.
And the stone. And now you are in on a lie, aren't you? It's deceit. And you're going to go around and get yourself persecuted and put to death in a horrible way for this lie? People flew airplanes into the Twin Towers for a lie, I think. But they didn't know it was a lie. Right? But in the first century, these people, if this is a con job and they've hidden the body of Jesus, once they start pulling out the stones, getting ready to stone you, when you say, wait a minute, it's all a misunderstanding. But they went to their death. Maybe all but John.
Yeah.
For a lie? For a con job? The disciples believed that he rose and appeared to them. This is, people try to contrast this, they'll call it the hallucination theory. People wanted Jesus so badly they started seeing him. Do you see any problem with the hallucination theory?
Well, it appeared so many times to so many people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can all be.
Hallucinations are private. You don't have group hallucinations. They just don't happen in the literature. Nobody sits around as a group of 20 people and sees the exact same hallucination. And he ate with them? I mean, that's a heck of a hallucination. Huh?
Yeah.
Paul and James converted. Why is it especially important? You might say, okay, Paul just kind of felt bad because he'd been doing bad things to people and he just got his life straightened out. But what about James? That's an amazing conversion if you think about it. Why?
Well, he knew Jesus better than any of the others because he was his brother.
Yeah. He's one of them that came and said, let's get our brother out of here because he's nuts. And before long, and I mean before long, he's running the church in Jerusalem. He's the leader. Well, what in the world would make a person who thought his brother was nuts and dies, and all of a sudden he's saying, my brother was God? Something unique and weird had to have happened to make him spin his head around. Christianity started in Jerusalem. We've already talked about that. Why is that important? Because you can't fake it. You could fake it if you started this thing in Paris. Well, there's no Paris back then, but anyway. So you started thousands of miles away, people are going to say, well, that's a good story. I mean, I don't have the time to go and check it out, but that's a great story. But it's right there. That's pretty gutsy to start your religion if it's a fake, and you're going to start it in that city. Why is it a big deal that they change rituals?
They did just not change rituals just like that.
No.
They just
Moses told them, these are the things you're supposed to do. They'd grown up as good Jews. That was what you hung on to, right? You hung on to your rituals because nations would come and take you off into captivity. The only thing you had to keep you together were those rituals, right? You got your synagogue and you had to do all those Mosaic things. That's what made you a Jew. And now they're going to take 2,000, 3,000 years, whatever, and just toss it aside and start something new? Yeah, they did. Seems like something big would have had to happen to make them dump their Jewishness and go a whole different direction here.
Such as the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, that's a good one right there. So, what's the conclusion with this? I kind of like that picture because it's sort of like those guys on the ground are thinking about, so what do I do? Jesus is walking by saying, come on, let's go be fishers of men. They're going, yeah, I got my nets, got my job. What do you think about this? So we have 4 choices today. At one time they called it a trilemma. C.S. Lewis came up with this, but I think they're not I think there are 4 choices that we can say. Is Jesus a liar? I think there's a problem with that. Is he a lunatic? Because he was claiming some weird things. Is he a legend? People just change the stories. Or is he Lord? We think the first problem is if he was a liar. He's just making this stuff up.
Too much things to talk about.
Sorry, let's see what?
There's too much factual evidence.
Okay, too much factual evidence. Do you ever have you ever been around liars that are like perpetual liars? Does it begin to catch up to them after a while? I mean, do you start kind of going, I'm not going to believe much coming out of this person's mouth. I mean, he spent 3 years with these disciples. You don't think they could have caught this lying quality? That seems weird. And for them to go on and die for this liar, that makes no sense. A lunatic? Some of the greatest philosophies and expressions have come out of Jesus' mouth. Does not sound like a lunatic. Legend? No, not enough time. So I think we're down to the 4th one. I like the 4th one a lot better. I think it fits the story a lot better. Jesus is Lord.